warriors struggle. They make mistakes. They make bad calls. They cry to the heavens sometimes or get knocked down. But what they don't do is quit. We find a way to keep moving forward, even if it's by inches at a time, because you are fulfilling a purpose.
Someone cares about you.
There's a reason why your heart is beating.
You still have a purpose.
Don't give up.
It's important to know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
Engaging in daily physical activity such as taking a walk offers a wide range of benefits for everyone. Walking not only provides physical advantages, but it also aids in relaxation, stress management, mood improvement, and reducing the risk of depression. As you head out on your mile-long walk, I appreciate you tuning in as I talk with Air Force veteran DJ Vanas. DJ is a member of the Ottawa Nation and serves his community as a motivational storyteller with an expertise in leadership and personal development, with a mission to build the warriors of tomorrow today. He's also the author of several celebrated books, including his latest, The Warrior Within, which attempts to unpack the ideas and concepts of the warrior spirit that apply to our own lives and careers, especially in these difficult and uncertain times. DJ, welcome to the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Thank you for having me, Danny. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. As our listeners remember to activate their Strava fitness tracker to record their mileage, would you mind sharing what it was like to grow up as a military brat?
Absolutely. It was a great experience. I absolutely loved it. I grew up with kids from every background, different countries, different belief systems. It was like a true melting pot, in base housing where I grew up. And I grew up at the end of a runway, which I loved that aspect too. There was always something flying in or out, which was fascinating, which also turned me on to the military, later in life. But just having that experience, it was a real sense of community. Our parents were doing important missions. And so there was a lot of kind of a deeper understanding in that community environment than in any other community I've been in. So a lot of shared values, a lot of shared principles. We always felt safe, unfortunately too safe. There were base cops everywhere, so you couldn't get away with anything. But, but what a great place to grow up, or a great way to grow up as a kid. I really enjoyed it. When I was growing up as a brat, one of the downsides that I never liked was moving. Saying bye to a new group or bye to your friends and, going to a new group where you didn't know anybody. And, you have to introduce yourself and, hi, I'm DJ and what's your name? But it was one of the things that I look back on now as one of the best gifts. It got me in this mode of you had to be socially engaged. You had to push out of your comfort zone where you didn't make new friends. I hated it when I was a kid. Absolutely look at it as a blessing as an adult, because I've learned over my life, even growing up, to swim with every kind of fish in the sea and be able to interact at all different levels, all different types, backgrounds, to be able to find common ground and have quality conversations and learn from each other, in a respectful way. So I look back on it now as a really incredible experience and something I'm very grateful for.
That's really awesome. I myself wasn't a military brat, but I have a lot of military in my family, and the conditions in which I grew up with led me to 18 different schools over the course of my childhood, to include 5 different high schools. So when you're talking about needing to be able to socially engage in a quick way, to be able to connect with people, because having a community is so important in life. And if we don't develop those skills, it leads to struggles later on, especially when we're trying to build new relationships, or even just trying to find our own sense of security and identity. So how was that for you as a child, going around other military families, or were you guys out in the community more?
We were, I guess, kind of both. I mean, when you're on base, you felt safe. You knew everybody. That was your hometown. But like, for instance, when we lived in South Dakota, I was a younger, I was like a little kid there. But when we moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, we were at Keesler Air Force Base, I spent as much time outside of the community as I did in. So, you kind of get a balance there. But I just look at it as, like I said, it was a great experience. Being able to interact and kind of put yourself in other people's shoes, I think, is a great life quality. To be able to be empathetic, to be able to listen and, really get to know people at a deeper level. I think that's more needed now today than ever, in our society, to be able to, listen more and talk less. But, one of the things too, especially that sense of belonging is so critical, especially to teenagers. but at every stage of our life, it's critically important. I read an article about how important belonging is to teenagers and being accepted, that they prioritize it higher than even food, water, and shelter, which actually kind of enlightens or kind of sheds light on the fact why when we're teenagers or when we watch teenagers do extreme things to be accepted, it kind of makes sense in that regard. Because, basically back in the day, if you were cast out of your tribe, you're going to die. The stakes were high. So even though situations may have changed, that wiring in our brain hasn't. If we feel cast out, we feel like, we're right on the edge of death, is how our body responds to it. So it's really important, that sense of belonging at every stage of life. But I really learned to appreciate it when I was a kid.
That's awesome. And I love that you felt so much at home within the military community that you finally decided to join the military yourself. Why did you decide to join the Air Force?
I did my research. I grew up in the Air Force, but I looked at the different branches. I looked at the missions. I looked at their lifestyles. And I feel strongly still I made the right choice. I really enjoyed my experience in the Air Force. And of course, it's always those funny things when you're growing up as a kid. You're like, I'm going to join the Air Force someday. And my dad goes, don't do it. Even though he was in for 21 and a half years, he served a whole career, had great experiences. But just being around it, there was a level of comfortability and a sense of adventure. Just watching my dad do important work, coming home in uniform every day, hanging out with the people he worked with and served with, who I looked up to and admired. I wanted to be part of that tribe, and so when I started doing my research on which branch I wanted to go into, this just came to the forefront. I applied when I was in high school. I applied to 8 different colleges, but a couple of them were the U.S. Naval Academy and the U.S. Air Force Academy. And I got accepted to the Naval Academy prep school, but I got accepted to the Air Force Academy direct in. And so that lined up on both ways because that was my number one pick. And then to go directly in was even better. So I chose that route. But no regrets whatsoever. Enjoyed the experience. I only left the military because I found something I'd love to do even more. That was the only reason why I stepped away.
That's incredible. So after the academy, we all kind of have this conception outside of the Air Force and amongst the branches, what other branches are like, right? The nicknames to kind of position ourselves as the best in whichever branch of service. And I was fortunate enough to serve alongside both sailors as well as Marines in combat and on ship. And so we definitely had a conception of what the Air Force is. Where did your Air Force career, because I don't want to put any of those stereotypes upon you, where did your Air Force career?
You're thinking it, Danny. I know you are. No, there's a level of healthy competition between the branches. It would be a bizarre world we live in if it wasn't like that. Constantly giving each other grief, constantly giving each other, teasing each other. It's part of the deal. And it should be. We should be proud of the branch we represent and be able to poke fun at the other guys and gals. So
absolutely. I try to be respectful. My mother always said, don't say a disparaging word, but when I hear about dormitories and cafeterias, we get a little side-eyed towards the Air Force. So what was your Air Force experience like in the late 90s and early 2000s?
Oh, it was great. And yeah, don't be jealous, Danny. It's par for the course. Whenever the other branches tease us, when they get stationed on our base or do joint assignments, they're always at our facilities. For our food, for our dormitories, we take care of our people well. I'm proud of that. But no, I had great experiences. I worked the first year. I had an incredible experience after graduating from the academy. I got selected to work in what was called then the Minority Enrollment Office. Now it's Office of Diversity. But they brought me in because I'm an enrolled tribal member, and we wanted to increase diversity at the academy. So we went out to these communities that we hadn't been to before, specifically tribal communities. We didn't have much of an outreach there. And they sent me here, there, and everywhere, worked me like a dog for a year, and I loved it. Promoting the Air Force and the route to officership through either the academy or ROTC. That's where I really cut my teeth on going out and speaking to all different types of groups and small crowds, big crowds. And then I got into, I was an acquisitions officer, systems acquisitions. And so I worked in the space warfare arena. So we built and launched satellites and for our space network. Yeah. And I thoroughly enjoyed that that whole experience. I was stationed in LA Air Force Base, which, yeah, you can go ahead and tease me on that one. Downtown LA, El Segundo, no runway. It was the most, non-traditional base you could imagine. But we were basically the business hub for all of our contractors like Aerojet, Hughes Aircraft, JPL, that would come together and put these components together to build these really high-end, space assets. And I got my master's degree while I was there at University of Southern Cal. I got to go to Australia 4 different times for a month at a time. We had a satellite readout station there that was getting a redo for hardware, software. And so we were going out there quite a bit. That was an incredible experience. And then I got back to the Air Force Academy. And that was my last duty assignment, was working in the admissions office. And I ran the office that I was a part of as a lieutenant. And that was an incredible honor. We worked really hard to, increase diversity in our cadet ranks, that were going to be officers, and just loved the work, loved working for my alma mater, and really felt proud of the work that we did during that time and the people I got to meet. So I had a wonderful experience. And like I said, I started speaking more and more on the side. And at a certain point, I basically had 2 full-time jobs and I couldn't do both. And so I had to make a choice, and I chose to do the work that I do now. And, again, really loved it. Didn't say bye to my friends that just don't wear a uniform anymore, but loved the experiences I got, and the things that I learned in the military, I use every day. Running a business, being an author, setting up my own travel, interacting with all different types of people and backgrounds. I attribute a lot of that ability to the time I spent in uniform. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, that sounds like such an incredible career in the Air Force. And honestly, the job that you did sounds a lot like the same branch that they developed over the last 10 years, created a whole new service with the Space Force. And so like the precursor to that work, they had to then turn around and appoint tens of hundreds of thousands of new cadets to a whole new branch. And so you got to kind of be at the birthing place of that, which is also a really unique and interesting place to be. But as you had mentioned, you really took to the public speaking and the teaching and the engaging, especially within the Native community here in the States, and leadership and personal development, so much so that as your new career began to actually emerge and your life's calling emerged, you transitioned out after only 10 years. And I say only because you really had your choice of what you wanted to do. So what was that transition like for you, the security of the Air Force and what you knew all your life, and going and speaking and teaching and writing?
In a word, Danny, it was terrifying. And I gotta be honest, I was sweating bullets, man. I was waking up in the middle of the night. I questioned it down to the very last day where I turned in my paperwork. Because again, the military life is stable. You know what the expectations are. They take good care of us. You have camaraderie, you have a community. And when you get out, all that's different. It was like a blue sky project that had no guarantees, no medical insurance. I mean, it was just basically you're creating your path as you go. And it was terrifying. And I read a couple quotes that I still carry with me to this day. They weren't mine, but they helped me when I was freaking out. Is leap and the net will appear. That was one that I really liked, and it did. And then the other one is leap and grow your wings on the way down. And I think that's a healthy approach too, is you don't know what you don't know. And until you push yourself to do something different, you don't know how good you can become at who you are and what you can do. You have to push yourself to do that. But it was scary. I mean, I had a family to take care of. I had only known military lifestyle. And to go out and do this and create my own business, my own path, was really, it was really scary. But, I learned that your friends are still your friends. You can learn new stuff. We all have that ability, no matter what our age or stage of life. And there is also, nothing wrong with a healthy fear of failure as a motivator, at least short term. You don't want to live your life like that, I don't think. But at the beginning, it really did help me stay sharp, ask questions, get out of my own ego and pride and go, I'll just figure this out. It's like, no, I need help. I need to figure this out now. So I would go up to people and go, hey, how did you do that? And that was a great push, in that regard too. I was reading the books, I was listening to, asking for help, asking questions, found good mentors, but it wasn't a smooth transition. I mean, like I said, it was kind of rocky at the beginning, but it worked out. I never regretted the decision. There were times where I was, fear was at a pretty high level, but the best things in life are worth fighting for. They don't come easy, but it doesn't mean you don't do it.
Yeah, sometimes that military life, especially when you're in it, can really, regardless of what the public thinks, people that have never served or put on the uniform think, it can feel a lot easier and a lot more secure, despite what wars and conflicts are going on in the world. But taking that leap is so important, especially when you feel so convicted, so called to that purpose. And a lot of people get stuck because before they even get to the part where they're ready to leap, they like this idea of a lack of self or a lack of importance, or even just feeling like, well, I'm supposed to stay here because this is what we provide. Right. One of the things that people don't see a lot in taking that leap, though, is the build up to it. We've done a lot of preparation. We've scouted what the terrain looks like, but then we do have to take that jump. And even if we don't have our wings yet, or the parachute built, or the things in place, we know that there's people on the way down with us that are there to help us prepare for that.
That's it. Yeah. No, and such is life. Such is life, right? I mean, I remember going through free fall parachute school at the Air Force Academy, and all the prep that we did to do that. And you jump out and you free fall for 10 seconds. There's no tandem jumps. There's no static line. It's you and your chute, and you jump out and you do your sequence, and you prep for this for weeks. And we go through these jump sequences over and over and over, and our bodies are bruised and we're tired and exhausted, but they're trying to drill it into our minds what we need to do. But that being said, the first jump, I didn't want to go. Like, I get to that edge of the door, all that prep work, it's go time now. This is where the rubber meets the road. And so taking that leap, that's what it all leads to. And when I looked at the rest of my stick, the group, they're all scared too. So that gave me some confidence. I wrote about it in my book, that I tell the story of how this all went down, but it was nice to be able to do that with a group of people. So it's really important to surround yourself with the right people that are going your way, that are trying to achieve things that are similar to you, that have similar values, virtues, similar character, the things that you want to develop and grow in yourself. You want to surround yourself with those people. And then the cool part is, once you jump and you do that thing that you didn't know you could, you're floating down and everybody else around you is screaming too, with joy at that point because their chute opened. But, that community and camaraderie matters. But yeah, making that transition was tough. But I will tell you, anybody who's in the military now and getting ready to make that transition to go into the civilian world, I just want to say a real quick message that you got this. You got skill sets you don't even realize. You've got experiences that you sometimes will discount. You can bring all that to bear to create a new life, a new path, and you've got more than you think. Sometimes we take those things for granted. All the things that we got out of that military experience, we can put that to anything. And so many of my friends have done that. They've gone into all different fields, all different careers, gone back to school, started their own businesses, what have you, or stayed in government service. But we are equipped when we're in the military to do a variety of different things, but we want to be confident. And I hope that, people who are in the military that are getting out are confident in all those skills and the things that you earned and developed the hard way. Be proud of that. I mean, you've got great stuff. You've got great assets to draw from, and you can create anything you want to see with it.
One of the things I try to remind people of is the job that we did, or the things that we went and did. At one point, we had no clue how to do them. And it wasn't until we were forced to do them that we saw that we could perform. Yep.
And then once you get skilled at that, you couldn't see life any other way. You're like, oh, I've always, known how to do that. No, you didn't. You showed up. You didn't know your head from your rear end. Yeah, I remember the first day of basic training, I got my head shaved and we have name placards in front. I'm being screamed at by 2 cadre, and I honestly forgot my name. They're screaming at me, "What's your name?" I had to look at my placard like I was so blanked out. So we all start, at a very different version of ourselves than we become through development. But the thing that I ask people to do is don't discount all that development. The things that you learned, the responsibilities you upheld, the way that you learn to work in a team environment, the way that you learn how to communicate, how to push yourself, discipline. I mean, there's so many things. It's just, we sometimes don't look at it that way because we're in that moment of fear. But what I ask people to do is just take a breath and look back at where you came from, and look at all the tools, all the things that you've assembled as you move forward. You got this.
And I know that within a lot of your teachings that you do in your public speakings and your writings, you talk about trying to create this warrior mindset or warrior spirit taken back from your understanding and your cultural heritage, and teaching people what this warrior actually is, because there's a misconception. A lot of ideas come to mind when we say the word warrior, whether it's masculine, whether it's strong and tough and fearless. And, I think you describe it really well when you say he's like this glistening ripped man and nothing can touch him and he's impervious. He's the impervious warrior, right?
Yep. And that's what keeps the warrior role inaccessible. The warrior role, is so often that Hollywood image. The sweaty, chiseled dude, and it's usually a dude, and, shooting bazookas and knocking down buildings. And we see that image so often. But when I wrote about it, and the way I share from the stage or from the platform is different than that image. I come at it from a tribal-centric viewpoint. And within our tribal communities, that warrior role has a different connotation to it. My tribe, we call a warrior Ogichi-da. And that term has very little to do with what we ever see on TV and in movies. It's somebody who, yes, at times would protect, would fight and sacrifice if needed, but they were also peacekeepers. They were also leaders. They were, at the end of the day, contributors. They were somebody who led by example, not perfect example, but they dedicated their lives to developing their creator-given talent and ability so they could be an asset to the tribe that they served. And whether today, native or not is irrelevant, that idea can apply to anybody, because we all have a tribe to serve. That tribe might be our family, our community, our team, your state, whatever capacity you're fulfilling that in. We all have a tribe to serve. And the burning question that should be on our minds is, what am I doing today to develop myself so I can use my talents and abilities to impact somebody else in a positive way? So it's somebody at the end of the day that's dedicated their lives to service. But yeah, that whole idea of, warriors are, beyond fear, pain. They don't need any outside encouragement. They don't need help. All they need is the next worthy challenge. That's a bunch of baloney. Warriors get scared. Warriors are grinders. They get scared. They deal with pain. They deal with fear. But they do what they do because they know it's important and it's affecting and impacting other people in a positive way. That's always the goal, is to have that element of benevolence in what we're doing. Warriors, struggle. They make mistakes. They make bad calls. They cry to the heavens sometimes, or get knocked down under, while everybody's standing there pointing at them. But what they don't do is quit. We find a way to keep moving forward, even if it's by inches at a time, because you are fulfilling a purpose. And our purpose is not, a warrior fights for something beyond their own personal welfare. They fight for something bigger than that. And they fight for more than people than just that one person. That's being a fighter. A fighter is somebody who uses their talent, ability, and energy to accomplish a goal that primarily benefits them. And that's important. Don't get me wrong. That's not a bad thing. That's the first step to any level of self-improvement in our life, whether it's losing weight, leaving a bad relationship. We have to be a fighter first. But then a warrior is elevating that up and using that time, energy, and talent to impact somebody else's life or many lives. That's what that warrior role is really about.
I love the way that you defined this real warrior, those characteristics and values that are important to cultivate and positively impact our communities. The life of service is the ultimate calling that we have, but we're all given certain creator given talents, as you just mentioned, it's not about what I can do. It's not about my ego and how strong and how tough I am and the things that I can accomplish on my own. It's about how do I answer the call, given the gifts that I have, to be able to introspectively look at myself and go, what do I need to accomplish the mission that I'm being asked to complete? And again, not for self.
And we can get in our own way on this stuff too, by the way. Because sometimes we get stubborn, we get prideful, and we think, I got to be strong, I got to be tough. Well, let's redefine what that looks like. Because sometimes the strongest thing, the toughest thing you can do is ask for help, is to get outside encouragement or support, or say, I'm struggling with this. I need some advice. I need some insight. Sometimes that's the strongest, toughest thing we can do, because at the end of the day, we have to remember our purpose. And it's to, traditionally a warrior's purpose was to feed and protect their people, not to feed and protect their ego. And we get in our own way on this stuff sometimes when we're just banging our head against a wall. We're forgetting the fact that I don't have time to do this. I need to find a way around this. I need to ask this guy for a ladder and stop, get out of my own comfort zone and get what I need so I can continue to fulfill the work that I'm put here to do, that I can continue to serve. And I don't paint myself into a corner where I limit my capacity, I limit my ability, I lead myself to burnout, to anxiety, because I'm trying to do it all alone. We're not supposed to do it alone. If you're doing it alone, you're doing it wrong. I mean, you're actually violating the laws of nature according to what I was taught by my elders. We're a lot more like bees and ants than we are like eagles. We need each other. We're better when we're with each other. With the right people. Let's be clear about that. But when we surround ourselves with that dynamic, it brings out the best stuff we never knew we had. Because we are putting ourselves in context with other people who are, like the people I surround myself with. I hang out with people that are smarter than me, stronger than me, more resilient than me, more spiritual than me, more, and I choose to be in that environment because I know that they pull, prod, and push me to bring out this better stuff in me as well. And so I choose to be in that environment, and we're competitive. The people I roll with, we're a competitive group, but we don't compete at each other's expense. We compete together and we push each other. We cheer each other on. Occasionally we kick each other in the butt a little bit when somebody's slacking off. Like, be careful who you choose your friends to be, because they'll come back and haunt you. Like when I was writing my third book, none of them are easy, but this last one was the biggest project and it was a lot of work. And there was times where, I'm talking to my friends, they're like, hey, how's it coming? I was like, I haven't written in the last couple of days. Like, well, you better get on that, man. That book's not going to write itself. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah. Like, so, we'd laugh, but the point was taken. It was like, they're not going to let me, drift off and lose sight of my goals. And I do the same for them, I hope, too.
Absolutely. I mean, we're never created to do life alone. And as we isolate, life tends to get harder because that community is the one that's supposed to lift us up. And if we surround ourselves with people that aren't checking in, that aren't poking and prodding and reaching out to us, it's really easy to start feeling the weight of all the things that we want to accomplish not getting done. And having that supportive community is just so necessary for a fulfilling life.
It is. And all the studies show that. I mean, they're showing what really makes somebody happy, what really adds to longevity. And what keeps coming back over and over again is a sense of belonging, a sense of community. And we are responsible for building that in our own lives. We are responsible for building our own tribe. And I tell people, don't be selective, be picky. Because who you roll with is going to be who ultimately you start to become. That whole idea, birds of a feather flock together. Absolutely. So we need to pick. I mean, that's our responsibility. That's our choice to make. But we're social creatures by design. The Creator made us this way. We are neurologically hardwired for connection. That being said, it's our responsibility to make sure we're putting the right people in our circle so that we can develop ourselves, to the level that we want to get to.
Definitely. And it's not just the people that we surround ourselves to, but it's also the pace in which we approach our problems. And a lot of the times, I know myself, and I read this in a portion of your book, when you were just getting started on this business and working in the Air Force, having 2 full-time jobs, the reason why it stood out to me is because you developed a stress-induced condition called shingles. You developed it in your leg, and the same thing happened to me a year and a half ago, but it happened in my ear.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. That is a not fun condition. That is horrible.
And the thing with it is, the doctor told me the same thing he told you. It's caused by stress, and so we have to learn how to manage the actual stress. That doesn't mean that our capacity for work and our never quit attitude goes away, but that means that we also have to focus on taking care of the things that our body desires. Our diet, our sleep, our nutrition. And you said you were going to talk about sleep here in just a minute. So how do you go about managing all that you do and still take care of your body as well?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, how do we do both? And we can have our cake and eat it too. But we have to do it purposefully. I mean, even a year after I got the shingles, I was under the same amount of stress, maybe even more. But the way that I was handling it was very different. And so the results I was getting were very different. But we have to make it a priority. This idea of self-care when it's convenient is absolute garbage. If we are the fount of all this great service we are trying to provide to the people that we serve, that we're trying to make an impact, we cannot do that when we're burned out or apathetic or have a health crisis. I say this very strongly in my book several times. You cannot be a warrior when you're falling apart. Forget intentions. It's all about execution. Because we may at the end of the day have a heart to serve, want to serve, a deep desire. But if you're falling apart as you do it, you're gonna again limit your impact. So you've got to take the time to take care of your body. And by the way, traditionally, our warriors in our tribal communities did this too. They were very conscious about how they took care of themselves, what they ate, staying hydrated, going to ceremony, training, the practices that they would go through. They were very methodical in how they developed themselves because they knew they needed to be, because their level of responsibility was so high. So we need to make the time to do that. Make the time to sleep the right amount at night. Make the time, set reminders on your phone. We use them for every other thing. Set a reminder to hydrate, set a reminder to eat. Sometimes we forget because we're busy, but we've got to make that a priority, making fitness, time to work out, a priority. This stuff is medicine. This is like skipping a medication that you should be on and just going, I don't need it today. Yeah, you do. And that's one of the things that gets us into trouble is, in our tribal communities, medicine is looked at very differently. It's not just a pill or a potion. It's anything and everything that keeps us healthy, mind, body, and spirit. And that can come in any form. That can come in hanging out with the right people, spending time alone, getting enough sleep, pursuing a hobby, watching funny movies, spending time outdoors. Anything and everything can qualify, but you have to know what yours is and use it purposefully and on purpose. Because I talk to people all the time that are like stressed to the hilt, falling apart. And you ask them, well, how do you take care of yourself? Well, I do all this. And I was like, so are you doing all that stuff? They're like, no. Okay, well, that's a problem, right? Because knowing a thing and doing a thing are two different things, And so that's the first thing. And then in our tribal communities is that medicine isn't something we wait to seek out once we're already sick and out of balance. It's something we incorporate into our lives daily to keep us strong and resilient. So that's the other thing that gets us into hot water. Well, I'll go get medicine when I'm already falling apart. No, you waited too long. We don't have to. When you see the writing on the wall, we don't have to hit the wall to make change, and all too often we do. I was guilty of it years ago when I got the shingles, but I am a born again advocate for good, methodical self-care because I want to be the best version of myself on a daily basis. And I can't do that just like anybody else. I can't do that if I'm falling apart.
When you talk about like you're a born again advocate of the self-care, I mean, I come from the healthcare background. I gave people this advice and
you guys are the worst ones. You guys are the worst ones, Danny. Like anybody that's in the medical field, like, or any medical technician, any nurse, doctor, make the worst patients. And this is the tough part. I mean, I grew up, my mom was a career nurse, and I work a lot with healthcare folks and I love them to death. And I say what I say lovingly to them. I say, as far as self-care goes, you guys say some of the craziest stuff I have ever heard come out of human beings' mouths because they get it too. It's like, oh yeah, it's important and I am going to take care of myself next year when the kids are grown,
right?
When this project is done. Don't worry about me. I've got a vacation scheduled for the year 2032. I'm going to be good. So yeah, but again, it's knowing a thing and doing a thing. We got to be in alignment with that stuff. And if not, we learn a painful lesson, as you did too, of how not to do it. You can only burn the candle at both ends for so long before you run out of wax.
Absolutely. And the thing with things like self-care is they're incredibly simple, but it's hard to develop the discipline. And so if you're anything like me, like put it down on the calendar or else it's just not going to get done. Like make that task list and say, okay, I'm going to complete this list by the end of the day, or it's just not going to get done. And like the more preventive maintenance that we do, the more preventive medicine that we do on our bodies, especially when we're healthy, the longer our bodies are going to be able to function, the longer we're going to be able to continue to serve our community, serve our purpose, and work in our God-given talents. And so it's one of the things that I love that you teach about, but you also talk about this drive. And I'm really curious, what drives you, DJ, as a warrior?
What drives me is knowing that my time here on this earth is limited and that the Creator has given me certain things to use in this world. And I see that more now, even as I get older. Like these things were not given to me for me. They were given for me to develop so I can have impact with somebody else. Whether it's one person or 100 or, scale is irrelevant. But the fact that we are trying to use this to make a positive impact in somebody else's life is important. And I want to do as much as I can for as long as I can while I have a chance to do it. Because there will be a moment where we all draw our last breath. We don't know when that's going to be. But in the meantime, I am firmly of the belief that we were put here to serve. If we are not here to serve, why the heck are we walking around taking up space? And if we want to do that well, and if we want to do it for a lifetime, we've got to take care of ourselves in that process. And it's a pace. Life is not a sprint. We hear that all the time. But until you experience something that reminds you of that and reminds you to take time, and you don't need to run through your life and the service that you want to provide. You walk through it and you can do it long term. We don't want to be strong this week. We want to be able to be strong for a lifetime, for a career. And we can't do that if we're just running at full speed with our hair on fire. That's not sustainable.
And to that note, I mean, there's so many ways that people can get into service and start doing things that are going to better their community, better their lives. But there's kind of too many things to get involved with. So how do you know which battles that you're going to fight and which paths you're going to take?
Follow your passions. That's usually one of the things that's the best indicator of the direction you should go. Like it's your magnetic, your needle pointing to magnetic north. Is the things that excite you, that you get passionate about, that you really have a heart for, are the reason why we feel that way is because for a reason. That's probably the path we should be walking. Because so oftentimes I talk to people that go, gosh, I would love to do this, or this always has been an attraction for me, or something that excites me, but they're going in a completely different path. Because we think sometimes that there's other elements of that, fear. There's sometimes a feeling of, well, who am I to do something I actually love? It's like, who are you not to? You get X amount of time, to walk your journey. You're going to work hard anyways. You might as well work hard towards what you actually want to see in your life. You're going to be putting in the time and hours anyway. So that's kind of my litmus test, is if it's something that drives me. And the thing is, as I get older too, Danny, I am much quicker to say no to things. To say, no, that's not in alignment with where I'm going. Not interested. You try to do it tactfully, but just feeling that in my gut when I know this isn't a good decision for me. I don't want to do this just to make somebody else happy. I want to be true to myself. And that's where I'm at my best in the work that I was put here to do. You can't do that if you're trying to do a million things. By necessity, creating a successful life and journey or career is not just learning what to say yes to. It's also absolutely learning what to say no to. There's only so much baggage you can put on your plane before it falls out of the sky. And people try it all the time. There's been points in my life where I did it too. But it comes with a cost and a consequence. And it's not just a health issue, but sometimes it's just lack of progress. We get stuck because we're overwhelmed. So learning to say no is powerful.
Yeah, that's a really powerful tool. And I want to go back to just focusing on what you're passionate about. I want to kind of give a caveat to our listeners, because we're not saying quit your job and pursue this thing that like you've dreamed about doing, because there's opportunities to get involved in service and things that you're passionate right there in your community. It doesn't need to be a national level thing. It could be something like, coaching your daughter's soccer team and giving back to the community and engaging with kids in that way to raise up the next generation. It can be going down to the community theater and auditioning for that play because you just want to be able to express yourself in a creative way. But find out what it is. Don't do everything. Do the thing that you have a passion for, so that you can have something that fills you as well while you're continuing to serve your community.
And you can do it at any capacity, like you said. I love that you're highlighting that. I mean, you could do it at your current job. Mentor somebody. Ask somebody to be your mentor. That's also part of the service that we forget about. It's not just serving somebody else. It's allowing ourselves to be served, giving somebody else a chance to do the same thing for us. It's circular mentorship is what I call it in my book, is where we're all, kind of in some form of development by not only being mentored, but by mentoring others too. And then everybody benefits from that. And it feels great to not only share and teach, but it also feels great to put yourself in a place where you can allow somebody else to receive that too. So, there's infinite opportunities to be of service or to push yourself into those directions of, following those passions. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic or, sweeping the board and starting over. It can be incremental things, but being able to find out where a good fit might be just requires us to be aware of what's going on around us.
Absolutely. DJ, you have so much experience and wisdom that you share with the world in forms of books and engagements and events. Where can our listeners go and connect with you and continue to learn?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And the best way to get a hold of me is on my website, which is nativediscovery.com. And that website has information on what I do, who I've worked with, information on my books. And my latest book, The Warrior Within, is sold anywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And if you feel you're too busy to read, that's okay. I can read the whole thing for you. There's an Audible version, and I'm the narrator. Spent 4 days in the sound booth doing that darn thing. But again, happy how it turned out. And there's a bonus session on the end of that. I get interviewed by one of my best friends in the whole world who now works for the National Medal of Honor Institute. And we do like a 90-minute interview at the end of that on the audio version of the book. But that's the best way to get a hold of me, nativediscovery.com. And I'm also on social media. I'm on LinkedIn under my name, DJ Vanas. I'm on Facebook under Building Warriors, and Twitter as well.
That's awesome. Thank you again. Before we close out the conversation, I did want to just ask you for some advice for our veteran listeners, military members, and anybody experiencing any kind of difficulties. Because as many of our veterans and service members continue to face hardships, the unfortunate reality is that some may feel overwhelmed and contemplate suicide. And with that in mind, could you share a message of hope for individuals currently grappling with these challenges?
Yeah, that's a big one, Danny. We've all had friends that have experienced that. The dark side of being isolated and struggle is real. But we have to, hopefully understand a few things. Number one, no situation is permanent. We all go through pain. We go through struggle. We don't want to isolate ourselves in that moment. And this is the crazy part about dealing with challenges in our own lives. It's the point in the moment where we most need other people. We need what my buddy Kevin calls rope holders in our life. We need that. But it's also the moment that we're most likely to isolate and withdraw. So we have to know that there's an internal battle going on in that regard so that we can know how we're going to respond before we get there. But, we all need support. We all need encouragement. We all need help at times. Life is not meant to be endured alone. The exact opposite is true. We need each other. We're better when we're with each other. And sometimes the strongest, most courageous thing you can do is ask for help and say, I need support right now. I'm struggling. I can't do this on my own. I need somebody else to help. And sometimes that is the most courageous thing we can do. I know we struggle with that at times, but we're human beings and we don't have to go through this alone. We shouldn't.
DJ, I truly appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and experience with us here on 1 Mile, 1 Veteran.
Thank you for having me, Danny. It's been an honor.
And thank you, listeners, for listening to DJ's story during your walk today. Don't forget to leave a review and let others know what you think of the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast. Your reviews help others discover our community and join the fight to help prevent suicide. So help us and our community now by leaving your own review.